On this Wednesday night, we're in London just outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, and the anticipation is building from the residents inside that special place to those right across the UK. The wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is now just 3 days away. Time to triple check all the details with a special eye towards security. We're covering all the angles tonight, from matters of pomp to issues of certain circumstance.
Also tonight, we'll look at the new pipeline brinksmanship from Ottawa to Alberta to BC.
And a new bump in the road for talks between the United States and North Korea. Keith Boag examines the latest rhetorical rocket from Pyongyang. Is Donald Trump's plan still on target? This is The National.
It was here at Buckingham Palace 37 years ago this summer that Prince Harry's parents, Charles and Diana, greeted adoring crowds after tying the knot at St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, of course, Meghan and Harry are not getting married here. That honor falls to a far older royal residence, Windsor Castle, about 40 kilometers outside of London. Windsor Castle will soon play host to hundreds of people from all walks of life, from the rich and famous to survivors of last year's Grenfell Tower disaster. And while current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not snag an invite, a family with another famous Canadian political last name did, and their kids even got jobs. 4-year-old Ivy Mulrooney will join Princess Charlotte as a bridesmaid. Her 7-year-old twin brothers, John and Brian Mulrooney, will serve as page boys for Prince Harry. Their parents, of course, are Ben and Jessica Mulrooney. Their grandfather, the former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulrooney. Jessica has been close friends with Meghan Markle ever since Markle moved to Toronto in 2011.
We're here in Kensington Market. I love it so much. They have pedestrian Sundays. It's a lot of fun.
And notable guests are starting to arrive, including some of her former Suits co-stars like Gabriel Mock. Meghan's mother, Doria Raglan, landed today in London as well. She might just walk her daughter down the aisle after Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, bowed out over heart trouble. So if you take that guest list full of royals and celebrities, add the roughly 100,000 people expected to flood into Windsor on Saturday, and then you combine it with the ongoing security threat in Britain, and you get a sense of just how complicated it's going to be to try to keep everyone safe. Thomas Dagler got an inside look at that security operation.
Windsor knows all about pomp and pageantry. With a couple big-time VIPs living in that castle, police go to great lengths to secure this crowded town. But come wedding day, when Windsor's population will more than triple, the challenge will take on whole new proportions.
This is by far the largest operation that we've undertaken in the Windsor area, and probably the largest we've had in the Thames Valley Police.
Sure, London saw 1 million people in the streets for William and Kate's big day, but the lack of room here means people will be much closer together, and that poses its own challenge.
The plan on the day is based on the work beforehand.
We toured the town with the police commander in charge at that last royal wedding.
And when you see things like this, like a number of rooftops, windows overlooking the castle, overlooking the carriage procession, what kind of challenge does that pose?
Every one of those is a vulnerability, isn't it? Because they overlook a route, they're a position there for, at worst, a sniper.
So how do you secure a procession route lined with shops and homes? Police are going door to door, having a look inside every building, planning airport-style security for anyone coming to town.
It's no longer just about organised terrorism, it's about somebody hiring a van and driving that van through a crowd of people, or someone just grabbing a kitchen knife and running amok through a crowd.
To prevent van attacks, these barriers have been set up throughout Windsor.
Any access point onto this central area, no matter how narrow, if you can get a car down it or a truck down it, you've got to put something like this across it.
Inside that white van, cameras and computers reading the license plates of all cars heading toward Windsor Town Centre, scanning for any suspicious vehicles.
We want to make sure that the people coming to this event to enjoy the day and feel safe while they're doing it.
Overhead, CCTV cameras able to track anyone, and on the ground, about 5,000 police officers.
There'll be a whole number of officers out there that you won't see, and we won't go into the specifics of those. But they're all there to keep the public safe, but also to be able to respond to anything that happens.
They are carrying out old-fashioned spot checks as well, though they hope any threat won't even make it this close.
And fresh from Windsor, here's Thomas Degler. What's the plan if it gets too crowded?
Oh, this is the kind of operational conversation that they're not having publicly, but police are reported to have set caps. 18,000 people right along the high street with the best view of Windsor Castle. When that fills up, they're going to funnel people over to the Long Walk, the biggest park with the biggest crowd, another 75,000 people there. And if people feel it's getting unsafe, if police feel that Windsor has filled up, then they're going to order the railway company to not have any trains stop in Windsor anymore, essentially cutting off the flow.
Which will thrill so many people.
No kidding.
Okay, we'll see you on Saturday.
Can't wait.
In the run-up to this wedding, there has been so much focus on the bride, Meghan Markle, and it's no wonder. She has an extraordinary backstory. A divorced American actor and activist, but it's her background as a daughter of an African-American mother and a white father that may really be groundbreaking.
I think for many people growing up, and myself included, we couldn't see ourselves reflected in the royal family in any way.
Can Meghan change that? Margaret Evans digs into that story as our coverage from London continues later this hour. Tomorrow and Friday, we'll bring you the National from Windsor, as CBC News brings you extensive coverage all week on television, on radio, and online. All of this is leading up to Saturday. Our special wedding coverage begins at 4 a.m. Eastern on CBC Television, CBC News Network, and cbcnews.ca. Rosie, I know you don't need to set your alarm. You're already hosting the block party.
I am, and I've told everyone that I've invited you'll be wearing a fascinator, so it'll work out well. See you then. Whether you
Game on.
Whether you support the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion or not, you may end up being on the hook for part of it. The finance minister says the government is prepared to cover Kinder Morgan's financial losses caused by BC's attempts to block construction. The move comes just weeks before Kinder Morgan's do-or-die deadline for the project. But is it enough? David Cochran has the answer.
We know that there is so much wrong with the Kinder Morgan pipeline.
In Burnaby, a die-in by people who want the pipeline to die. In Calgary, a rally by oil workers who want it to live. In Ottawa, a finance minister who wants to resuscitate it with public money.
We're prepared, for example, to indemnify the project against any financial loss that derives from Premier Horgan's attempts to delay or obstruct the project.
Just how much he won't say, but Bill Morneau is putting taxpayers' money where his government's mouth is to compensate Kinder Morgan from losses caused by the BC Premier.
We believe that what Premier Horgan has done is unconstitutional. It's a federal jurisdiction.
I think that's rhetoric and hyperbole on his part. There are fundamental challenges to that project that he well knows, and I think for a Toronto-based finance minister to single out British Columbia as a problem here, he should look at the failure of Energy East. He should look at the failure of Keystone and a whole host of other projects.
Morneau's money-back guarantee only covers the actions of the BC government, not environmental protests or legal challenges from First Nations. It means Morneau has sided with Houston over Horgan to ease the pressure on Kinder Morgan, while Alberta is raising the pressure on BC by threatening to cut off fuel supplies.
Albertans, British Columbians, and all Canadians should understand that if the path forward for the pipeline through BC is not settled soon, I am ready and prepared to turn off the taps.
While the politicians bicker and posture, Kinder Morgan says until everything is settled, nothing is settled. We remain steadfast in our previously stated principles, clarity on the path forward. While discussions are ongoing, we are not yet in alignment and will not negotiate in public. Morneau, though, will, at least to a point. If Kinder Morgan walks away, his offer stands for anyone who wants to pick up the pieces.
If Kinder Morgan isn't interested in building the project, we think plenty of investors would be interested in taking on this project.
So Kinder Morgan if necessary, but not necessarily Kinder Morgan. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
As infighting over the pipeline continues politically, it could ultimately be up to the courts to decide the fate of the expansion project.
And First Nations are going to utilize every remedy possible to challenge this project and to stand up for the rights of our grandchildren, for the rights of the environment.
Several First Nations and other groups want the federal court to rule that the government and the National Energy Board failed to adequately consult them.
And we said in February we were going to refer this question to a higher court to confirm our jurisdiction.
And Premier John Horgan is asking BC's highest court to decide if his government has the right to bring in stricter rules for oil moving through the province.
I don't work for Kinder Morgan. I work for the people of British Columbia.
Whichever way these decisions go, it's expected they'll be appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, which will only drag out this debate.
Now to that abrupt about-face from a country known for its unpredictable nature. As we learned last night, North Korea is threatening to pull out of the June 12th meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, reverting to a more bellicose stance after months of more moderate tactics from Kim Jong-un. As Keith Bogue explains, so far the U.S. hasn't risen to the bait.
We haven't seen anything. We haven't heard anything. We will see what happens.
It's notable that Donald Trump did not fire off a tweet or warn of impending fire and fury when North Korea threatened to call off their planned summit. His spokeswoman said the White House hopes the meeting will go ahead and that bumps along the road to peace were understandable.
Look, this is something that we fully expected. The president is very used and ready for tough negotiations, and if they want to meet, we'll be ready, and if they don't, that's okay too.
North Korea had been presenting its nice guy side, having friendly meetings between Kim Jong-un and the South Korean president, halting missile tests, releasing captured Americans. But apparently a brief exchange on television brought back the tough guy North Korea.
Is it a requirement that Kim Jong-un agree to give away those weapons before you give any kind of concession?
I think that's right. I think we're looking at the Libya model of 2003, 2004.
Libya voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons program in 2003. A few years later, the West turned against the Libyan regime, and its president, Muammar Gaddafi, wound up dead. In a blistering statement, North Korea referred to National Security Advisor John Bolton by name and described comments like his as a manifestation of an awfully sinister move to impose on our dignified state the destiny of Libya or Iraq, which had been collapsed due to yielding the whole of their countries to big powers. Joint U.S. and South Korean military exercises this month also annoyed North Korea, or so it said. In fact, those exercises were scheduled and known to North Korea months ago. They take place regularly, and North Korea had previously gone so far as to say it would not object to them taking place now. But what North Korea is doing is no surprise to some who've seen this dance before.
The wheels could still come off this thing. We ought to press on diplomacy as best we can. We ought to be prepared for alternatives.
We are going to be having a meeting.
It may turn out the president regrets some of the kinder things he said about Kim Jong-un recently.
Kim Jong-un he really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing.
Certainly his political rivals are ready to pounce.
We weren't even at the 50-yard line yet on denuclearizing North Korea, and the president was practicing his end zone dance.
And so, Keith, beyond the back and forth, what are we learning here?
Well, if you read the whole statement from North Korea, Ian, you see that their disagreement with the U.S. isn't just about the end state, whether they give up their nukes or not. They disagree even about the process. North Korea assumes the process should be what's called action for action, meaning that they make a concession about something, then the U.S. makes a concession about something, and the end state is denuclearization. The U.S. position is that North Korean denuclearization is the starting point, and then they'll consider concessions.
And so this doesn't seem to bode well for the talks taking place.
No, it doesn't seem to bode well at all. What's happening now is that it's becoming clear just how difficult reaching a denuclearization agreement will be. And if there isn't at least a reasonable prospect for success, then that raises the question, why have the meeting at all?
All right, Keith, thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead on The National, is it possible for Meghan Markle to bring change to race relations in Britain?
The Prime Minister makes a pitch at Yankee Stadium, but those students weren't his only audience. That's next.
And we'll head down south for a look at Hockey Night in Vegas, where fans have caught on to the game.
this magical ride that the Knights have been taking us on. You know, we just don't want it to end.
Tonight on the National, communities across southern BC are racing to prepare as the threat of more flooding looms. For days, the concern has been hot temperatures and rapidly melting snow, but now it's rain. Up to 40 millimeters could fall by Friday. That means no relief yet for the thousands of people forced from their homes. To help those affected, the BC government says it will match every dollar donated to the Red Cross. Also tonight, a warning to more than 20,000 past and present CBC employees. The corporation says an intruder broke into a locked room and stole a piece of computer equipment containing files with personal financial details. Among the information exposed, employees' names and bank account details. The corporation says it's budgeted $300,000 to cover outreach and insurance costs. 2 days after more than 50 Palestinians were killed by Israeli soldiers on the Gaza border, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today called for an immediate, independent investigation. In a statement, he also says the Canadian government is appalled by what happened to Canadian doctor Tarek Loubani, who says he was shot while trying to help wounded protesters despite being clearly marked as medical staff.
Justin Trudeau was in New York today, his 16th trip to the U.S. as Prime Minister. As Catherine Cullen explains, his challenge this time was to deliver two very different messages.
Clearly, for Justin Trudeau, this is the easy part. The NYU convocation crowd is friendly. The introduction is warm.
An avowed feminist.
Phrases that Canadians have heard many times take on a new context in the U.S.
Diversity doesn't have to be a weakness. It can be our greatest strength.
Comments about leadership that seem to hint at the America First president, but never name him.
This is the antithesis of the polarization, the aggressive nationalism, the identity politics that have grown so common of late.
Then there's the other part of Trudeau's job abroad.
I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here at Blackrock, an opportunity to talk about investing in Canada.
The trickier terrain.
We're always looking for how we can collaborate further.
In meetings with politicians and business leaders, he pushes Canada, all while NAFTA's future remains uncertain. The U.S. Congress said it would need something signed this week in order to get a deal passed this year, but negotiators aren't there yet. Stephen Harper's former economic advisor applauds Trudeau's approach to building U.S. support.
The truth is that Canada doesn't loom very large on the U.S. political radar, and so having domestic voices championing Canada's position or Canada's perspective is essential.
But acknowledges there are still outstanding issues preventing a new NAFTA deal.
This is going to take some time because many of the issues that remain are thorny and complicated.
Now, Canadians are also fighting amongst themselves over the future of the Trans Mountain pipeline, and that could make some U.S. investors nervous about Canada. Trudeau will speak before New York's Economic Club tomorrow, and he'll make his pitch to win over that crowd, but it's safe to say it will be a bit more challenging than that Yankee Stadium love-in. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, New York.
As we go to break, we'll take in some London sights. But first, here's one of the stories that Adrian will have for you next from Buckingham Palace. Meghan Markle's Black heritage brings a spark of hope to a country still divided by race.
People have died awaiting treatment. People have been thrown out of their houses.
They knew what they were doing.
As the royal wedding approaches, there are a lot of expectations starting to pile up on the very slim shoulders of Meghan Markle, in part because race relations are often top of mind here in the United Kingdom. Margaret Evans has a look at some of the wounds that Markle may be able to help heal. A lot of those wounds are still very fresh.
Brixton, South London, home to the famed Electric Avenue and a cosmopolitan vibe. Like other parts of the British capital, it's succumbing to the inevitable pull of gentrification. But it's still the heart of one of Britain's oldest African and Caribbean communities. It was to Brixton that Prince Harry and his soon-to-be bride Meghan Markle came for their first official engagement in the capital as a couple, visiting a co-op aimed at keeping young entrepreneurs local and a youth radio station promoting diversity. And the black community took note.
Is it because of Meghan being of a mixed-race heritage? They could have gone anywhere else because London is a multicultural place, but Brixton has become the hub. And for some people, they refer to this as the capital, the black capital.
Everyone is listening.
As a biracial woman marrying into an institution seen by so many as a bastion of white privilege and a symbol of the abuses of colonialism, Meghan Markle has quickly been adopted as a beacon of potential change here, especially by young women of color. Freelance writer Georgina Lawton is a self-described Republican with little time for the monarchy. But the arrival of Markle on the scene has made her pay attention, seeing in it the promise of genuine change.
Harry marrying a light-skinned black woman won't undo the pain of the past in Britain. It won't undo all the negative aspects of our links to colonialism, but I think it will go some way in taking steps to repair race relations and promote multiculturalism.
Markle has written about growing up with an African-American mother and a Caucasian father, of the pain she felt being asked to choose an ethnicity, or seeing her mother endure racial insults. Lawton says the British media hasn't been much better.
The way in which the right-wing media in particular has discussed her heritage and taken upon the fact that she's from California, that she has links to Compton, that she has a dark-skinned mother with dreadlocks.
Prince Harry felt compelled to issue a statement condemning the racial undertones of some of the coverage.
I think it is a significant moment for people of colour, mixed-race people, black people, anyone who sees themselves in Meghan.
Artist Nikwe Desan goes by the name Dref. He's painted a series of murals featuring black women who've made a difference across London.
Because I didn't feel like black women from my community who were doing amazing things were celebrated enough. Yeah, it's very really simple as that, really.
Raising their visibility, he says, provides an important alternative narrative to what's on offer. Not to be dismissed in a country where the last editor of British Vogue featured a black model on only a dozen out of 300 covers, claiming they wouldn't sell magazines.
I don't think you can be awake and be black in this country and not feel racism.
Dref grew up in Windsor, where, believe it or not, the castle was on his paper route. His attitude towards the When Harry Met Meghan story is mostly one of bemusement.
Social media, when it was announced, people were like, oh my God, got a bit of colour in the royal family, and I'm just looking and like, really? It's like one person getting married. I remember the night when Obama was president and everybody was like, that's it, it's the end of racism, Really?
Windrush Square, also in Brixton, but here seething with outrage. People protesting recent revelations over the treatment of tens of thousands of legal Caribbean residents by the Conservative government.
They knew what they were doing.
They're known as the Windrush generation, named for the first big ship carrying migrants invited from former British colonies to rebuild Britain after the Second World War. Nearly 500,000 came, their leave to remain and that of their children guaranteed as long as they'd arrived before 1973. But 4 years ago, with an eye on immigration numbers, the British Home Office started questioning their legality. People who'd lived and worked and paid taxes in this country for half a century suddenly found themselves denied health care, the right to work, a driving license.
People have died awaiting treatment. People have been thrown out of their houses.
Lennox Drummond's parents were part of the Windrush generation. He calls the government's decision to destroy thousands of arrival records, making it difficult for anyone who'd never applied for a passport to prove when they'd come, a betrayal.
The reason why Winston has been a popular name in our community is because many people name their children after Winston Churchill. You know, my mother has never called this country anything other than the mother country.
Britain's black history doesn't begin or end with the Windrush generation, far from it. But critics say most Britons simply don't know it, that it's absent from the country's collective memory.
There's no national push, and there hasn't been, to talk about either current black British history of people who defied the odds or the odds that they were defying, i.e. British colonialism and racism.
Rennie Edo-Lodge is the best-selling author of a book looking at structural racism in Britain. She says black British history, slavery in particular, is often glossed over as a North American issue, even though British merchants forced an estimated 3 million Africans onto boats and into slavery in the British colonies. That legacy, says Edo-Lodge, doesn't disappear with a royal wedding.
In what absurd situation is it democratic or even representative to be chosen by a prince? It's simply not. I will rejoice when the British population elects a person of colour to be our Prime Minister.
People from black, Asian, or minority ethnic groups are twice as likely to be unemployed in the UK than white people. Black workers with degrees can expect to earn 23% less than whites, and black people are 8 times more likely than white to be stopped and searched by the police. A memorial last month for Stephen Lawrence, an 18-year-old black student set upon and stabbed to death by a gang of white racists 25 years ago. All of British society seemed to be represented, testament to the impact his murder had on this country. His family's long fight to see his killers brought to justice, culminating in a groundbreaking report highlighting institutional racism within the police force.
To me, that political and societal landing mark was far more monumental for Britain's relationship with race than Meghan Markle marrying Prince Harry, in my opinion. Because then it allowed people to do assessments of their own organisations using that criteria.
Critics say it should be a reminder for the current government. Eddie Grant's song, Electric Avenue, penned in anger over racism and unemployment more than 30 years ago now, can feel both close and distant at the same time. But it doesn't mean there isn't room for meaningful change. That's what journalist Georgina Lawton believes Meghan Markle represents.
I think for many people growing up, and myself included, we can look to the royal family as this kind of like cornerstone of Britishness. But of course, we couldn't see ourselves, for the many millions of black people in the country, we couldn't see ourselves reflected in the royal family in any way.
The next generation will likely be key. People like Lennox Drummond's daughter, Bailey.
I don't think I couldn't be in the royal family, but, you know, I'm not sure I would.
Out of the mouths of babes. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
Canada, of course, played a supporting role in this royal relationship. She was shooting Suits in Toronto when they started dating. So, of course, interest in all things Harry and Meghan spread quite quickly in Canada. Consider, for example, a BC woman's fashion blog called Markle's Mirror. We asked her to weigh in on how Canada might play a supporting role in the wedding wardrobe.
Meghan has often referred to Canada as her adopted homeland, and we could see that play out in a lot of different ways on Saturday, including some Canadian designers in the mix on her day. We could see designers like Erdem from Montreal also with British connections design her dress. We could see some Burke's pieces show up in her look. When she wears Canadian designer, it is madness. There is all kinds of attention that goes to that brand. The brands will often see 300-400% increases of traffic to their websites. They'll see huge increases in sales, and it also has a ripple effect where it will have a huge impact on the Canadian industry as well. She's relatable from a style perspective in that she wears clothes that a lot of women can see themselves wearing, including myself, and she's also relatable from a person perspective where she has really strong beliefs in women's empowerment, in charitable endeavors, and I think that those combination of things make for a great role model, and that's why I'm so supportive of her.
Lots more royal wedding coverage still ahead tonight on The National. When we come back, Nala Ayed visits a king in waiting with no kingdom that's waiting.
We have a flag with a royal coat of arms on it. We have the national anthem, which is a royal national anthem except for one word. All we're missing is the monarchy.
You're kind of a big deal when King George VI comes to your christening in 1945, and you've been a fixture of the extended royal family your entire life. Godson of the Queen, buddy to Prince Charles. But Crown Prince Alexander is a royal insider who's on the outside. His father was the last king of Yugoslavia. After years in exile, Alexander returned to Belgrade in 2000 on a mission that was largely unknown outside of Serbia, restoring the monarchy his father never gave up. Nala Ayed pays a visit to a prince.
For those ordinarily with little reason to laugh, these are fleeting, magical moments. They are orphaned, deprived children, invited to just be children, and to briefly behold the magic of royalty. For Serbia's Crown Prince Alexander, his palaces could hardly be put to better use.
It means a lot that the palace is being used for something good and that it becomes a tradition. I don't think you can ever erase the past. You can learn from the past and move ahead and create good moments. And this is a good moment.
There have been plenty good moments lately at Belgrade's royal palaces. Far from the global spectacles at Buckingham and Windsor palaces, here too they've recently celebrated a royal wedding, and in February, the first male heir to be born in Serbia in 90 years.
That was a very big event, very big event. Stefan was born on the 25th of February, and it was an amazing thing. We were so proud of this. He's a beautiful little boy, and we're very happy that he was born here.
But there is still one key thing missing, an actual monarchy.
Boy King Peter of Yugoslavia.
The more complicated chapter of the former Yugoslavia's monarchy began when Alexander's father, Peter, became king at 11 years old, after his father was assassinated. In 1941, another pivotal moment, when the young king left Yugoslavia ahead of a German invasion. He eventually married while waiting in London. Excitement when they had a son, Alexander, baptized at Westminster Abbey with Queen Elizabeth as godmother. Churchill declared room 212 of Claridge's hotel where he was born Yugoslav territory just for that day so he could become heir. There have been so many royal families who... Now at 72 and back at his father's royal palace in Belgrade, the still Crown Prince told us his story.
Of course, it's a strange story. I wasn't allowed to visit this place because I was an enemy of the state at the age of 2. Yes, it's terrible to be in exile. My father suffered dramatically. He thought he was going to come home tomorrow, but it didn't happen because the communists took over.
Right here we have a dining room.
The monarchy abolished, but the palaces remain. So too do the marks of communist rule, like this faint etching of a star. and the chair where Tito watched his films.
So in front of us is the chapel. Great. And there's Christ at the top, and somebody fired a bullet through Christ's forehead.
And even evidence of attempts at erasing history, which the Crown Prince decided against erasing himself when he was allowed to move in 17 years ago.
We came in here. It was a shock, because this was the home of my father, my grandfather, who built it and finished it in 1929. It was amazing.
In exile, he was raised on the hope of becoming king, but didn't live like one, taking out a mortgage and paying bills. But as a descendant of Queen Victoria, still royalty. So he and his wife, Princess Catherine, always invited to big Windsor family occasions, including the grand weddings of the Queen's children.
I always spent time with her. I admire her a lot. I think she's a great head of state, and everybody is very respectful to her. She's a great example to the world.
If I may add, the fact that you can tell she's fully aware that Alexander has no parents. He has no brothers, no sisters. He hadn't had a country for most of his life. And when she's near Alexander, I feel that all this is in her mind. And she really touches me a lot.
This is the side of the palace.
At a time when the Windsors are again in the spotlight, here they're still waiting for theirs. The palace is central again in capturing public imagination.
We have some beautiful trees here.
And telling the royal story by sharing the visits and the family milestones. Smaller here, but the effect no different than that of Prince Harry's wedding, to which they're probably invited, though they wouldn't say.
It's wonderful, and we feel that this will be one more joy for the United Kingdom and all those who believe in the British monarchy. There is one more good news for them, and this is what keeps things going.
How much does something like your wedding or the wedding of your child or the weddings coming up in Windsor contribute to the longevity, again, of royal families? There are people, even in the UK, who say that monarchies are outdated. They're not keeping up with the times.
I beg to disagree, but they're a minority, an incredible minority, insignificant. And the polling indicates that too.
The prince argues that in modern Serbia, a constitutional monarchy could pay dividends, promoting unity, striking an inclusive tone in a halting democracy once seized with ethnic and religious violence. But there has yet to be a groundswell of demand for a monarchy. And even while favoring it, Prince Alexander admits it is up to the Serbian people.
It should have been done years ago. But what we do have is an extraordinary situation. We have a flag with a royal coat of arms on it. We have the national anthem, which is a royal national anthem, except for one word. All we're missing is the monarchy.
One of the things that a country is missing terribly when it's not a country with monarchy is the continuity. The continuity is magic. The continuity is like having the same parents all your life. You know, it is just the way it is.
Not in Serbia now. And so without an official role, charity is their main offering. Despite a long line of births and weddings, their royal limbo endures. Nala Ayed, CBC News, Belgrade, Serbia.
Tomorrow night, in the shadow of Diana, we will have a look at how Prince Harry is following in his mother's charitable footsteps, sometimes in obvious ways, sometimes in more subtle ones, as in returning again and again to the HIV clinic where she once made such a difference. Here's an excerpt of our story. Diana is everywhere here. And now that it's her son who shows up, it's the spirit of her he sometimes seems to look for.
He loves to hear the stories of her visits here.
Carrie tells of a miraculous woman who had met Diana as an ill child but survived. Harry had questions for her.
She said to Prince Harry, I remember cuddling up to her on her lap and how soft and comfortable it was. And he said, I remember that well.
And of course he would. His memories are the frozen ones of a child, just 12 with those clenched fists walking behind the casket of his mother. That's on tomorrow's National, and that's the view tonight from London. When we come back, the rest of the day's news.
Tonight on the National, news of a settlement in the Larry Nassar sex abuse scandal. Michigan State University says it will pay out $500 million to more than 300 victims of the former gymnastics doctor. The university was accused of ignoring complaints about Nassar while he was working on campus. He was sentenced up to 175 years in prison earlier this year after pleading guilty to criminal sexual conduct. And a former gymnastics coach was arrested in Edmonton today for alleged sex crimes. Michelle Arsenault is facing 3 counts of sexual assault and 4 counts of assault against a total of 6 victims. The alleged incidents occurring in the 1980s and early 90s in Montreal. Police say his victims were girls as young as 10 years old. Arsenault is due in court in Montreal later this month.
Did he get enough? It is out of here.
And an apology today from Joey Votto. The Cincinnati Reds player, who's from Toronto, has been criticized for comments he made in an interview. He was being asked about James Paxton, who recently became the first Canadian in MLB history to throw a no-hitter in Canada. Here's what Votto said.
As far as, Toronto and Canadian baseball and the country of Canada and him being Canadian, I don't care at all. He or the Jays or Canada in general may disagree with that, but I couldn't give a rat's ass about that.
Today, Votto apologized for those comments, saying they came from a, quote, selfish and short-sighted place. So, believe it or not, here's a hockey question. Is a whiteout strong enough to overpower a sandstorm? The Western Conference final between the Jets and Knights moved to Vegas tonight, a city that from the beginning of the season embraced its brand new expansion team. And as Karen Pauls tells us, it has more to do with heart than hat tricks.
The Las Vegas Strip. It's all about bright lights and gambling.
This city never sleeps. It's going all the time.
But now there's a new game in town.
Welcome home, boys!
The Vegas Golden Knights, the newest franchise in the NHL, in their first season doing what no other expansion team has ever done. Their season opener came days after the mass shooting at a music festival last October, which left 58 people dead. Instead of a flashy launch, the players got involved in the community, winning over the hearts of people who had never been hockey fans before.
Especially after Route 91, that was a horrible wake-up call, but the Knights have actually brought us together and helped us heal.
We kind of adopted the team right away because of what they did for the community and vice versa.
This has gone from will hockey work in Las Vegas to where we're at now. This team has come together to really just build this chemistry and be a threat.
It was October 8th, and I placed a $20 bet on the Winnipeg Jets and a $20 bet on the Golden Knights.
When in Vegas, this transplanted Winnipegger couldn't resist.
I was actually poo-pooed a lot because people were saying, oh, that's such a long shot.
At one point, the Knights had 500-1 odds.
And then they started winning.
What are the odds now?
The Jets are 12-5, let's see, and the Golden Knights are 9-4. Yes, we do have a lot of liability, just like all the other Las Vegas sports books here in town have a lot of liability attached to the Knights.
But that won't stop him from rooting for the team.
We know that in the long run, the sports book's going to be just fine. But this magical ride that the Knights have been taking us on, we just don't want it to end.
What would it mean if the Golden Knights actually won the Stanley Cup?
The lights would be extra bright.
In the middle of the Nevada desert, a group of so-called golden misfit hockey players are now just golden. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Las Vegas.
Okay, enough of them. Jets fever has plenty of new fans jumping on the bandwagon, some of whom didn't really even know much about the sport until a few months ago. We asked one family from India, now living in Winnipeg, what it's been like to discover a passion for the game, and that is our moment of the day.
Actually, to be honest, I've never seen Winder before I come to Canada. I've never followed Winnipeg Jets, or I've never seen a game before. But people always talk about when you go to work or when you go to shopping malls or wherever you are. Everyone wants to talk about Jets game. It's a fast game, and not just game. It gives a lot of spirit. All my friends who are here, everyone started watching their games from this year onwards, and they're all from India, and they've never seen a game before. But they're all hardcore fans now. It connects people well, regardless of ethnic background, regardless of language and color and everything. Pogu Jets, Pogu!
So Cijo Joseph that you saw there only started watching hockey like a little more than a month ago. You know, the way people start watching it in the playoffs, and he loves it now. There you go.
It's like he says, it connects people well.
Yep.
When a team goes deep in the playoffs, you saw it in Ottawa last year. Here it was 2011. When one of my sisters-in-law in 2011 started talking about the Vancouver Canucks' third defense pair, I knew this was deeply in the psyche of the city. That is the National for Wednesday, May 16th. Good night.
Night.